White flight attendant smashes black boy's meds. Seconds later, his father grounds the plane. The EpiPen hit the floor with a sickening crack. Marcus gasped, his small hands clawing at his throat as it began to close. His lips were swelling, face flushing red, eyes wide with the kind of terror that no 11-year-old should ever know. The medication vial shattered into glittering pieces across the aircraft floor, liquid spreading like spilled hope. Flight attendant Karen stood over the destruction, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Around them, passengers screamed. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Another yelled, "What is wrong with you?" Marcus's father, James, dropped to his knees, desperately trying to salvage something, anything, from the broken auto-injector. Nothing. It was gone. All of it. Then James rose. Slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his voice cut through the chaos like a federal order. "This is James Cooper, Senior Vice President of Airline Safety for the Federal Aviation Administration. Authorization code Alpha 739 Hotel." His phone was pressed to his ear, his credentials displayed in his other hand. "Ground this aircraft, now!" The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, shaken and urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are making an emergency landing. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin." Karen's face drained of every ounce of color. But how did we get here? How did a routine Tuesday morning flight turn into a nightmare that would end with a plane being forcibly grounded and a woman in handcuffs? Let me take you back. Back to just 2 hours earlier, when Marcus Cooper and his father walked through the airport terminal with nothing but excitement in their hearts. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button, because stories like Marcus's need to be heard, and your support helps us keep bringing them to light. Now, let me show you where this all started. 2 hours earlier, Gate 27 bustled with the usual pre-flight energy. Business travelers typed frantically on laptops. Families corralled restless children. Overhead announcements echoed about boarding times and gate changes. Marcus Cooper stood beside his father at the window, watching the planes taxi across the tarmac. His eyes were bright with wonder, his backpack covered in NASA patches and airplane stickers. This was his first time flying alone with just his dad. No mom, no baby sister, just the two of them. It felt grown up, special. "Dad, that's a Boeing 737-800, right?" Marcus pointed at the aircraft being prepped at their gate. James smiled, ruffling his son's close-cropped hair. "Good eye, buddy. See the winglets? That's how you know it's the 800 series." At 42, James Cooper carried himself with quiet authority. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis. Nothing flashy despite his high-ranking position with the FAA. He'd learned long ago that humility and competence spoke louder than titles. His job was to keep people safe in the skies, to ensure every regulation, every protocol, every safety measure was followed to the letter. Today, he was just a dad taking his son to visit family in Denver. "You have everything?" James asked, going through their mental checklist one more time. Marcus patted his small medical bag. Clear plastic, TSA approved, impossible to miss. Inside, 2 EpiPens, antihistamine tablets, and a laminated card from his allergist explaining his severe peanut allergy. The kind of allergy that didn't just cause discomfort, the kind that could kill in minutes without intervention. "Got it, Dad. Both EpiPens, just like always. And you know what to do if—" "Dad." Marcus gave him that look, the one that said, "I'm 11, not 6. "I know. Tell an adult immediately. Don't wait. Use the EpiPen if I have to, even if I'm scared." James squeezed his shoulder. "That's my boy, smart and prepared." They boarded in Group 3, making their way down the narrow aisle to seats 17D and 17E. Economy. Despite James's position, he never used his status for upgrades or special treatment. It set a bad example, he always said. Everyone deserved the same respect, the same safety, regardless of which class they flew. As they settled in, Marcus organizing his books and tablet, James noticed her. The flight attendant working their section was a white woman, mid-40s, with severely pulled-back blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read Karen. She was stationed near the galley, checking overhead compartments, but her gaze kept drifting to them. Not casually, deliberately. Her eyes lingered a beat too long. Her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. That look, James had seen it 1,000 times. The one that said you don't belong here. The one that preceded 1,000 tiny indignities. He sighed internally, hoping he was wrong. Hoping this would be an uneventful flight where his son could just be a kid excited about flying. Marcus noticed, too. He always did. He was a perceptive child, old beyond his years in ways that broke James's heart. Marcus caught Karen staring and quickly looked down at his book, making himself smaller. "Hey," James whispered, tilting his son's chin up. "You have every right to be here. Don't ever forget that." Marcus nodded, but the light in his eyes had dimmed slightly. The plane filled up. A businessman squeezed past them, muttering about overhead space. An elderly white woman took the window seat across the aisle, offering them a brief, polite smile. Families settled in behind them, the usual organized chaos of boarding. Karen moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts, closing compartments. When she reached their row, her demeanor shifted. The professional mask slipped. "Seatbelts," she said curtly, not even making eye contact. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said politely, holding up his already fastened belt. She didn't acknowledge him, just moved on, her jaw set tight. James felt the familiar tension settling into his shoulders. Just get through the flight, he told himself. 3 hours, that's all. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration began. Marcus watched intently. He loved this part, always had, mouthing along with the instructions about oxygen masks and flotation devices. As they climbed to cruising altitude, James tried to relax, tried to focus on the fact that his son was happy, reading a book about aerospace engineering, occasionally looking out the window at the clouds below. Maybe it would be fine. Maybe he'd read too much into a look. But then the snack service began, and James learned exactly how wrong he was. Quick question: where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments. We love seeing our global community come together over these stories. Now, back to Marcus and James, because things are about to get much, much worse. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Karen emerged from the galley with the beverage cart, her colleague, a younger Latina woman, working the opposite aisle. The cabin filled with the familiar sounds of ice clinking into plastic cups, the rustle of snack packages, murmured drink orders. Row by row, Karen made her way down the aisle. James noticed she was pleasant enough with other passengers, smiled at the businessman, laughed at something a passenger said, offered extra pretzels to a family with toddlers. Then she reached row 17. The warmth evaporated from her face like water off hot pavement. "Drinks?" The word came out clipped, transactional. "Apple juice, please," Marcus said, using his best polite voice. "And, ma'am, can I see the snack ingredients? I have a severe peanut allergy." It was a simple request, one he'd made dozens of times on other flights. Most flight attendants appreciated the heads-up, went out of their way to double-check ingredients, sometimes even made announcements asking other passengers to refrain from opening nut products nearby. Karen's face hardened like concrete. "We don't have time for special requests. Everyone else is waiting." The words hung in the air, sharp and dismissive. James felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. Professional. "Ma'am, it's not a special request. It's a medical necessity. The packaging should list the ingredients. We just need to check quickly." Karen's eyes flicked to James, really seeing him for the first time. Taking in his calm authority, his educated speech, his refusal to be cowed. Something ugly flickered across her face. "Maybe you should have packed your own food if you're so particular," she said, the last word dripping with contempt. She yanked the snack basket away, holding it against her chest like he might try to grab it. Nearby, passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man in row 16 glanced back, frowning. The elderly woman across the aisle looked down at her hands. Marcus's eyes went wide. At 11, he understood exactly what was happening, even if he couldn't name all the pieces of it. His throat felt tight. But not from allergies, from shame, from the crushing weight of being made to feel like a burden for the simple act of trying to stay alive. But then, and this is what made Marcus extraordinary, he didn't shrink. He looked up at Karen, and despite the tremor in his voice, he spoke. "My doctor said I have to check. It's really serious. I could die if I eat peanuts." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Karen leaned down, and what she said next, she said loud enough for half the rows around them to hear. "Maybe you people should fly your own planes if our service isn't good enough for you." You people. Those two words, the ones that carried centuries of weight. The ones that reduced James and Marcus to something less than human in her eyes. James's hands clenched on the armrest, knuckles tight. Every fiber of his being wanted to explode, to demand respect, to protect his child from this poison. But he'd learned long ago that black anger, no matter how justified, was always seen as aggression. Always used as proof of exactly what people like Karen already believed. So instead, he breathed, slowly. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet steel. "We'll be reporting this interaction to your supervisor." Karen's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You do that." She moved on, servicing the next row with exaggerated cheerfulness as if nothing had happened. Marcus's eyes were glassy, but he didn't cry. He wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, he reached over and squeezed his father's hand once, hard. James squeezed back, then leaned close and whispered, "You did the right thing, son. Always. Never apologize for protecting yourself. Never let anyone make you feel like your life doesn't matter." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. He pulled out his book, The Wright Brothers, and tried to focus on the words, even though they blurred on the page. The elderly woman across the aisle caught James's eye. Her expression was pained, sympathetic. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Said nothing. Did nothing. It was always like this, James thought bitterly. The good people who felt bad but never spoke up, never risked their own comfort for someone else's dignity. He pulled out his phone and typed a detailed note about the interaction. Date, time, flight number, attendant name. He'd file a formal complaint the moment they landed. It wouldn't change what had happened, but it was something. Documentation mattered. Marcus tried to read for the next 30 minutes, tried to let his father's words settle over the hurt like a bandage. He was resilient. He'd had to be, growing up black in spaces where his presence was always questioned, always challenged. His parents had prepared him as best they could, taught him to speak up, stay calm, trust in his own worth, even when the world tried to strip it away. He didn't know yet that his resilience was about to be tested in ways that would make this humiliation seem small, because 3 rows back, a passenger was opening a package of cookies, peanut butter cookies. The scent began to drift forward through the recycled cabin air, and Marcus's throat began to itch. If you're feeling angry right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment and tell us, have you or someone you love ever experienced something like this? Let's talk about it. And if this story is resonating with you, smash that like button. Now, hold on tight, because what happens next will leave you breathless. At first, Marcus thought it was just in his head, anxiety from the encounter with Karen making his body react. But then came the cough, small at first, then another. Then his hand went to his throat instinctively. "Dad," he whispered. James looked over and his blood went cold. He knew that look. He knew those signs. Hives were blooming across Marcus's neck like angry red flowers. His breathing was becoming labored, each inhale a little shorter than the last. His lips, oh God, his lips were starting to swell. "Marcus, where's your EpiPen?" James's voice was urgent but controlled. Every ounce of his training kicking in. Stay calm, act fast. Panic helped no one. Marcus fumbled for his medical bag with shaking hands, passed it to his father. James hit the call button, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. The light above them glowed insistently. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Marcus's wheezing was getting worse, his hand clutching his father's arm with desperate strength. "I know, buddy, I know. Hold on. Help is coming." But James's eyes were on the aisle, searching. Finally, Karen appeared, her face arranged in exaggerated annoyance. "What now?" "My son is having an allergic reaction. He needs—" She cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I'm sure he's fine. You people always exaggerate every little—" "Look at him!" James's voice rose despite his best efforts. Because Marcus's lips were visibly swollen now, his face flushed, his breathing rapid and shallow. The hives were spreading down his arms. This wasn't exaggeration. This was textbook anaphylaxis. A few passengers turned to look. Someone across the aisle gasped. The businessman in 16C pulled out his phone, starting to record. Karen's expression flickered, a flash of something that might have been uncertainty, but then her jaw set with stubborn determination. "Let me see that," she said, reaching for the medical bag in James's hands. "Ma'am, please, he just needs—" James tried to hold onto it, but Karen yanked it from his grasp with surprising force. She examined the EpiPen like it was a suspicious package at airport security, turned it over, squinted at the label, her face twisted with theatrical suspicion. "How do I know this is real? How do I know this isn't some kind of drug paraphernalia?" The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Around them, passengers were openly staring now. Several had their phones out. The elderly woman across the aisle looked horrified but remained frozen in her seat. James stood slowly, carefully, his tall frame unfolding to its full height. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every ounce of authority he possessed, every regulation he'd memorized, every protocol he'd enforced. "That is an FDA-approved prescribed medication. The label clearly shows my son's name, his doctor's information, and the prescription number. You can verify every word I'm saying, but right now my son cannot breathe, and you are preventing me from administering life-saving treatment." Marcus gasped from his seat, one hand on his throat, the other reaching for his father. "Dad, can't breathe." The sound of his child struggling for air cut through James like a blade. He reached for the EpiPen. "Give it back, now." Karen stepped backward into the aisle, holding the medical bag against her chest. Her eyes were wild now, cornered and dangerous. She'd gone too far and knew it, but her pride, her prejudice, wouldn't let her back down. "I don't think so," she said, her voice rising. "I'm confiscating this until we land. Security risk. I'm responsible for the safety of everyone on this aircraft, and I'm not taking any chances with suspicious— My son is dying." The words tore from James's throat, raw and desperate. Passengers were standing now. Someone shouted, "Give him the medicine!" Another voice, "What is wrong with you?" The Latina flight attendant rushed over from the other aisle, her face pale with horror. "Karen, what are you—" But Karen wasn't listening. She was trapped in her own narrative, the one where she was the authority, where these people were the problem, where she was justified in every cruel decision because of the color of their skin. She looked at James, looked at Marcus gasping in his seat, tears streaming down his swollen face, looked at the EpiPen in her hand, and then, as if in slow motion, as if the entire aircraft held its breath, Karen held the EpiPen high. "Oops," she said. Not a sincere oops, not an accident, a deliberate, malicious oops. She opened her fingers. The EpiPen fell. It hit the floor with that sickening crack, the sound of plastic breaking, of glass shattering, of hope splintering into 1,000 pieces. But she wasn't done. Karen lifted her foot, her sensible airline-issued heel, and brought it down hard on the auto-injector. Once. The medication vial inside exploded, clear liquid spreading across the floor in a widening puddle. For one perfect second, the entire cabin was silent. A silence so complete it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Then chaos erupted. Passengers screamed. Someone shouted obscenities. The businessman in 16C yelled, "I got that on video! I got everything!" The elderly woman finally found her voice. "Oh my God, that child! Someone help that child!" Marcus made a sound, a high, thin wheeze that barely qualified as breathing. His eyes were wide with terror, locked on his father's face, not begging, not panicking, just trusting. Trusting that somehow, some way, his dad would fix this. James dropped to his knees, his hands scrambling through the broken pieces of the EpiPen, trying to salvage something, anything. But it was useless. The medication was gone, the device destroyed, his son was dying, and the woman who'd sworn to keep passengers safe had just signed a death warrant. The other flight attendant, Maria, her name tag read, rushed over with horror written across her face. "Karen, what did you—" "He was being disruptive." Karen's voice was shrill now, defensive. "I had to maintain order. I had to—" She stopped because James was standing, slowly, deliberately. And when he stood, he wasn't just a father anymore. He was something else entirely, something that made Karen take an involuntary step backward. James pulled out his phone. His hands were steady despite the terror screaming through his veins. He pulled up a specific contact, hit dial. And when he spoke, his voice carried the cold, absolute authority of federal law. "This is James Cooper, Senior Vice President of Airline Safety, Federal Aviation Administration, authorization code Alpha 739 Hotel." Karen's face went from red to white in the span of a heartbeat. "I am declaring an in-flight medical emergency and exercising my authority under 14 CFR Section 121.557. Ground this aircraft immediately. Divert to the nearest airport. I want FAA investigators, airport police, and paramedics on the tarmac when we land. This is not a request." The voice on the other end confirmed, crisp and professional. Within seconds, James was patched through to the cockpit. "Captain, This is James Cooper, FAA. We have a critical medical emergency in the cabin. A flight attendant has destroyed prescribed emergency medication during an active anaphylactic episode. I need an immediate emergency landing and priority medical response. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, shaken and urgent. Ladies and gentlemen, we are making an emergency landing. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for immediate descent. The plane banked hard, beginning its rapid descent. Karen stood frozen in the aisle, the blood draining from her face, reality crashing down around her like the walls of a collapsing building. You're with the FAA? James didn't even look at her. He was already kneeling beside Marcus again, cradling his son's face in his hands. Breathe with me, buddy. In through your nose, slow, out through your mouth. Stay with me. Stay with me. Marcus's eyes were starting to glaze, his lips grotesquely swollen, his breathing barely there. Medical kit, James shouted. Someone get the goddamn medical kit. Maria, the flight attendant, was already running to the front galley, returning with the emergency medical supply kit. Her hands shook as she pulled out the backup epinephrine auto-injector. I'm certified, she gasped. I can administer. Do it, now. Maria pressed the auto-injector against Marcus's thigh, through his jeans, the hiss of the injection, the medicine entering his system. But would it be fast enough? Would it be enough at all? A woman 3 rows back stood up, a black woman in scrubs. I'm a nurse. She pushed through the aisle, Benadryl tablets from her purse already in her hand. Let him swallow these if he can. Together, James and the nurse coaxed the antihistamines into Marcus's mouth, helping him swallow with tiny sips of water. That's it, baby. You're doing so good, so brave. You're the bravest kid I know. Marcus's eyes found his father's. Even through the swelling, even through the terror, there was something in that gaze. Trust, love, and yes, courage. The kind of courage that shouldn't be required of an 11-year-old, but was anyway. Behind them, Karen tried to move away, to escape to the galley. James's voice cut through the cabin like a federal order. Ma'am, you will remain exactly where you are. Under my authority as an FAA official and under 49 U.S. Code, paragraph 46504, you are being detained for interfering with a flight crew member's duties and for assault. You will not move. You will not speak. You will wait for law enforcement. Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't mean... He was being difficult, and I thought, you thought wrong. James's voice could have cut steel. You assaulted a minor. You destroyed prescribed medication during a medical emergency. You endangered every single passenger on this aircraft by creating a crisis situation that forced an emergency landing. Do you have any idea what you've done? Passengers were shouting now. The businessman filming, I got every second, every single second. The black nurse, tears streaming. That baby could have died. You tried to kill him. Karen's face crumpled. I didn't. I was just... He was being disrespectful, and you people always... Stop talking. Maria, the other flight attendant, finally found her voice. Her face was a mask of disgust. Just stop. Don't say another word. The elderly woman across the aisle was crying openly now, useless guilt pouring down her face for every second she'd stayed silent. The plane descended rapidly, the pressure change making ears pop. Kansas City International Airport appeared in the windows, emergency vehicles already visible on the tarmac, lights flashing red and blue. Marcus's breathing was improving, slowly. The epinephrine was doing its job, pulling him back from the edge. His swelling was beginning to subside, though his face was still puffy and his voice nothing but a rasp. Dad, I'm here, son, right here. You're going to be okay. You were so brave. So brave. Marcus managed the smallest smile. Wasn't that scared. Knew you'd fix it. James felt something break and mend simultaneously in his chest. This child, this beautiful, courageous, resilient child, shouldn't have to be brave like this, shouldn't have to trust that his father could fix the cruelty of the world. But he did, and he was. And God help anyone who ever tried to hurt his son again. The plane touched down hard, an emergency landing, no time for gentle approaches. Emergency vehicles converged immediately. The cabin doors opened, and paramedics rushed in with their equipment. 11-year-old male, anaphylactic reaction, administered epinephrine approximately 8 minutes ago. James rattled off the information while paramedics checked Marcus's vitals, placed an oxygen mask over his face, prepared him for transport. Airport police boarded next. 3 officers, faces grim. James stood, showed his FAA credentials, and pointed at Karen. That woman. She's under federal detention for interfering with a flight crew's safety duties, assault of a minor, and destruction of medical equipment. I want her in custody. Now. The officers moved swiftly. Karen's shrill protests echoed through the cabin as they placed her in handcuffs. This is ridiculous. I was doing my job. I was maintaining order. He was— Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent, one officer said flatly. I suggest you use it. As she was led down the aisle, passengers erupted, shouting, some clapping, others crying, phone videos still rolling, uploading to social media in real time with hashtags that would trend within the hour. James didn't care about any of that. He only cared about the small hand gripping his as paramedics prepared to wheel Marcus off the plane. I'm coming with him, James said, not asked. Stated, Of course, sir, right this way. As they moved through the cabin, passengers reached out, touching Marcus's hand, his shoulder, offering words of encouragement. You're so brave, young man. God bless you, baby. We're all praying for you. The black nurse, who'd helped with the Benadryl, walked with them to the door. She leaned close to Marcus and whispered, You changed something today, sweetheart. You stood up when it mattered. Don't you ever forget that. Marcus, oxygen mask covering half his face, managed a small nod. The ambulance ride was a blur. James held Marcus's hand the entire time, answering paramedics' questions, watching monitors, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in that his son would be okay. At the hospital, Marcus was immediately taken to the ER. More epinephrine, IV fluids, monitoring. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. They'd gotten to him in time. The delayed second dose of epinephrine had worked. He'd need observation, but he was going to be okay. 2 hours later, Marcus was sitting up in a hospital bed, wrapped in heated blankets, eating a cherry popsicle. His face was still puffy, his voice still hoarse, but the color had returned to his cheeks. He was alive. James sat beside the bed, his hand never leaving his son's, and finally, let himself breathe. Dad? Marcus's voice was scratchy, but stronger now. Yeah, buddy? I wasn't that scared. I was, but I knew you'd fix it. You always do. James felt his eyes burn. You shouldn't have to be brave like that, Marcus. You shouldn't have to go through things like this. You're 11 years old. You should get to be a kid. Marcus looked at him with those old, wise eyes. But that's what you taught me, Dad. Stand up, speak up, stay calm, even when people are mean, even when they want you to get small and quiet. You taught me never to do that. I know, son. I know I did. But God, I wish I didn't have to. Me too, Marcus squeezed his father's hand. "But I'm glad you're my dad. Even when bad stuff happens, I'm glad it's you." James pulled his son into a careful hug, mindful of the IV and monitors, and let himself cry. For the terror, for the rage, for the exhausted relief, for every time his child would have to be brave in a world that saw his blackness before his humanity. "I'm proud of you," James whispered into Marcus's hair. "I'm so damn proud of you. You're stronger than I ever was at your age." "Stronger than I am now." Marcus pulled back, managing a small smile despite his swollen face. "Nah, I learned it from you." Outside the hospital room, an FAA investigator was already on site, taking James's statement. Airport police were filing charges. Karen was in custody. And somewhere in the digital universe, videos of the incident were going viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments, the court of public opinion rendering its own swift verdict. But inside room 247, none of that mattered. Only this: a father and son holding on to each other, grateful for another day. Before we continue, if you're not already subscribed, subscribe now, because this channel is committed to telling the stories that matter, the ones that expose injustice and celebrate courage. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how justice was served. And drop a comment. What do you think should happen to Karen? We read every single one. 3 weeks later, the news had covered it extensively. Flight attendant arrested after destroying child's life-saving medication. The videos had gone viral, sparking national conversation about racism in the service industry, about medical discrimination, about the ways implicit bias could become deadly. But for James and Marcus, life had to continue. Marcus returned to school, where his teachers and classmates treated him like a hero. He didn't feel like one. He just felt like a kid who'd been scared and lucky that his dad knew what to do. James returned to work at the FAA, though something had shifted. He'd always taken his job seriously. Safety regulations weren't suggestions, they were lifelines. But now he understood in his bones just how critical every single rule was. How one person's cruelty, one person's prejudice, could create a cascade of consequences that endangered everyone. Karen faced her reckoning swiftly and without mercy. The charges were federal, not just civil. Assault of a minor, destruction of medical equipment, reckless endangerment, interfering with a flight crew's duties under federal aviation law, which carried serious penalties precisely because air travel required absolute adherence to safety protocols. She wasn't just fired. That was immediate and expected. She faced federal prosecution. The trial was short, the evidence overwhelming. Dozens of passenger videos from multiple angles, the flight data recorder, the emergency radio communications, Marcus's medical records, the hospital report, the responding paramedic's testimony. Karen's lawyer tried to argue she'd been following protocol, that she'd felt threatened, that she'd made a judgment call in the heat of the moment. The prosecution played the video of her stomping on the EpiPen, played her words, "You people should fly your own planes," played her sneering oops as she dropped life-saving medication. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a black woman in her 60s who'd seen every kind of hatred dressed up as protocol, did not mince words. "Ms. Karen Mitchell, your actions on Flight 1847 were not a momentary lapse in judgment. They were a calculated, deliberate act of cruelty motivated by racial prejudice. You saw a child in medical distress and chose to weaponize your authority rather than exercise your duty of care. You endangered not just Marcus Cooper, but every passenger on that aircraft when your actions forced an emergency landing." Karen stood in her orange jumpsuit, her face pale, her hands shaking. You are sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Additionally, I am recommending that the FAA permanently revoke your flight attendant certification. 18 months, not a slap on the wrist, real time, federal prison time. But that wasn't the end of it. The FAA moved with bureaucratic swiftness. Within a week of her sentencing, Karen's flight attendant certification, the one she'd held for 22 years, was permanently revoked. Not suspended, revoked. She would never work in aviation again, not on a commercial flight, not on a private charter. Not in any capacity where she had authority over passengers' safety and well-being. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed, her name synonymous with the worst kind of discriminatory violence. But the real poetry of the justice was this. The case became a training example, not in some small regional way, in a national, industry-wide way. Airlines scrambled to update their policies, their training programs, their discrimination protocols, because if it could happen on one flight, it could happen on any flight, and the legal and public relations fallout was too catastrophic to risk. Every major airline in America updated their emergency medical protocols within months. Mandatory training on recognizing anaphylaxis, mandatory training on implicit bias and how it could literally kill someone, mandatory reporting structures for discrimination incidents, and in every single one of those training sessions, in every airline's updated procedures manual, there was a case study. The case study, the one that every flight attendant in America had to read and analyze and discuss. Karen Mitchell's case, her mugshot, her actions, her conviction, a stark, undeniable lesson in what happened when prejudice and authority collided with devastating consequences. She'd wanted to silence Marcus and James, to put them in their place, to remind them that in her domain, at 30,000 feet, she held the power. Instead, her name became a permanent warning. A cautionary tale told in training rooms from New York to Los Angeles. Every new flight attendant learned about her. Every recertification course included her case. The ultimate irony, she'd tried to make Marcus invisible, and instead she'd made him unforgettable. Not through his suffering, but through his courage, through his father's swift action, through the undeniable proof that silence in the face of injustice could be lethal. The airline that had employed Karen, SkyWest Regional, issued a formal apology, not the standard corporate non-apology that accepted no blame, a real apology. They met with James and Marcus personally. They donated $500,000 to the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America in Marcus's name. They invited Marcus to speak at their annual safety conference, not as a victim, but as a voice for change. Marcus, surprisingly, said yes, not to a conference circuit, not to become some kind of poster child, but to this one event where he could look flight attendants in the eye and tell them what it felt like to be dismissed, to be endangered, to have his humanity questioned at the worst possible moment. He was 12 by then, still young, but when he stood at that podium in a room full of hundreds of aviation professionals, his voice didn't shake. My name is Marcus Cooper, and I'm alive today because my dad knew what to do when someone tried to kill me. The room went silent. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it's true. That flight attendant looked at me, at my skin, at my face, and decided my life didn't matter as much as her authority. She decided that my medical emergency was somehow suspicious. She decided that humiliating me was more important than helping me. He paused, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. But I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here to make you think. Because every single day you have power over people's safety. You have the power to help or to hurt. And I'm asking you, begging you, to choose help. Every time, even when it's hard, even when someone doesn't look like you or talk like you, especially then." When he finished, the standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Grown adults with tears streaming down their faces, because Marcus hadn't just told his story, he'd challenged them to be better. And they heard him. The video of his speech was used in training programs. Marcus's face, smiling, alive, resilient, became associated not with victimhood, but with the kind of courage that changes systems. James watched from the audience, his heart so full it hurt. This was his son, his beautiful, brave son, who'd been through hell and come out the other side, determined to make sure it never happened to anyone else. After the speech, after the applause died down, and the conference moved on to the next session, Marcus and James walked outside into the bright afternoon sun. "You okay?" James asked, his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Yeah, Dad, I'm good." Marcus looked up at him. "Do you think it'll actually change anything? Or will people just forget?" James considered the question carefully. "Some will forget. Some people always do. But some won't. And those are the ones who matter. The ones who hear you and choose to do better. That's how change happens, son. One person at a time." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then it was worth it. All of it. If even one kid doesn't have to go through what I did." "You know what makes you different from most people, Marcus? Most people who go through trauma just want to forget it happened. But you turned yours into a shield for others. That's rare. That's special." Marcus smiled, that gap-toothed grin that never failed to make James's heart squeeze. "I learned it from you." They walked to their rental car, and as they drove through the city, Marcus pulled out his medical bag, the new one, with 2 fresh EpiPens and updated allergy information. He checked it methodically, the way he always did before flying. "Where to next, Dad?" "Home, buddy. Mom and your sister are waiting." "Good. I miss them." The flight home was uneventful, normal, the way flying should be. The flight attendant, a young black man with kind eyes, checked on them twice, made sure Marcus had everything he needed, and even showed him the cockpit before takeoff when the pilot heard about Marcus's love of aviation. "You're Marcus Cooper, aren't you?" the flight attendant asked quietly at one point. Marcus nodded, suddenly shy. "My training class studied your case. What you went through and what you said at the SkyWest conference." He knelt down to Marcus's eye level. "I just want you to know I became a flight attendant because of you. Because I wanted to be the person who helps kids like you feel safe. So thank you for being brave enough to speak up." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he just smiled and nodded. After the flight attendant left, James leaned over. "See? That's the change right there. That's what your courage created." Marcus looked out the window as the plane climbed through clouds, the ground falling away below. He thought about everything, the fear, the pain, the anger, the justice. He thought about Karen in prison, about training programs using his story, about flight attendants who chose kindness because they'd learned what hatred could do. And he thought about the future, about all the flights he'd taken his life, about the career he wanted in aerospace engineering, about the world he'd helped create, one where a kid's medical emergency was just that, not a referendum on their worth as a human being. "Dad?" Marcus said quietly. "Yeah, son?" "I'm not scared anymore. Of flying, I mean. I was for a little while after everything. But I'm not anymore." James squeezed his shoulder. "That's because you took your power back. You didn't let what happened make you small. You let it make you stronger. Is that what courage is?" "Yeah, buddy. That's exactly what courage is. It's not about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. It's about standing up even when it costs you something. It's about using your voice even when people try to silence it. Marcus nodded, processing this. Then, I think I want to help write better safety rules when I grow up, like you do, but specifically for medical stuff on planes. James felt his throat tighten with emotion. I think you'd be amazing at that. Will you help me? Every step of the way, son. Every single step. The plane leveled out at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The flight attendant returned with snacks, and without being asked, he checked every single ingredient label with Marcus, patiently reading each one, making sure everything was safe. Marcus chose pretzels, salt, and nothing else. Safe. Simple. And he ate them without fear, without shame, without the weight of having to justify his existence just to stay alive. It was a small thing, eating pretzels on a plane, but it was also everything, because 3 weeks ago a woman had tried to take this from him, his peace, his safety, his right to simply exist in a space without being questioned, doubted, endangered, and she'd failed. Not just because James had the authority to stop her, but because Marcus had the courage to speak up in the first place, because he'd asked for what he needed without apologizing for it, because he'd refused to be made small even when someone tried to crush him. That was the real victory, not the prison sentence or the revoked certification or the policy changes, though those mattered. The real victory was this: Marcus Cooper, 11 years old, eating pretzels on a plane, unafraid. As the aircraft carried them home through clear blue skies, James looked at his son, his brave, resilient, extraordinary son, and felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The fight wasn't over. There would be more Karens in the world, more people who looked at Marcus and saw a threat instead of a child. More battles to fight, more systems to change, more mountains to climb. But for now, in this moment, 35,000 feet above the earth, Marcus was safe. Marcus was heard. Marcus was valued. And that was enough. If Marcus's story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories of courage and justice like this one. And seriously, drop a comment. What lesson did you take from this? What would you have done in Marcus's situation or in James's? We read every single one. Until next time, remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to be silenced. Stay strong, stay courageous, and never let anyone make you small.